Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
Yeah, so the most dangerous question you can ask a writer is what their book's about, and you just watch them freeze up. I have a little bit of help with that in that Vince Flynn created this iconic character, Mitch Rapp, and he was one of the first writers to do that or write in this genre post-September 11th. And so you can see that very much in the body of work that he has written, in that his protagonist, Mitch Rapp, is a assassin for the CIA who is charged with carrying out his nation's vengeance in places that are very hard to reach, that he can go where other people can't and do what needs to be done when they can't. And so after Vince had written a number of books in this universe, he decided to go back and write Mitch's origin story. And so he wrote the first two books of what was supposed to be a 3-book trilogy, and those were American Assassin, which actually had a movie made about it by the same name, and then Kill Shot. And then for reasons we don't know, unfortunately, since Vince passed away, he never wrote the third book in that series. Instead, he went back forward in time and wrote The Last Man, which was unfortunately his final book before he passed away from cancer. And so Mitch Rapp fans everywhere have always wondered what happened to Mitch. How did his origin story end? And so Denied Access is that third book in that trilogy. It takes place in the early 90s, so it's a throwback book. And what makes it, I think, a little even more interesting is that Vince primarily dealt in his books with Islamic terrorism and with the threat posed by Islamic terrorism. And for Denied Access, it is very much a Cold War book. So you get to go back to kind of that espionage, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy era and see what made Mitch Rapp, and also get to do it in the context of the history that was evolving at that time. Yeah, great question. So with every book that you write, with every novel, you have to have something or find something that kind of lights your skin on fire as you're working on this book and say, what is it that's going to make this one different? What's interesting about it? What gives me that little tingle as a writer, and then hopefully gives a reader that same feeling? And so when I was looking at this book and kind of looking at the time period and realized it was early 90s and right around the time that the Soviet Union fell and the KGB crumbled, there were some very interesting things going on in the intelligence world back then. So back in, I think it was 1986, which was about 5 years or so before this book takes place, there was a episode known as the Year of the Spy, and it was called that because there were so many Americans who had been arrested who were spying for the Soviet Union or other intelligence services. And so it spawned this big reflection, if you will, within the intelligence services to say, what's causing this? Have we been penetrated? Where is the genesis of this? And so you really had, at this point in time, the FBI and the CIA pointing fingers at each other and saying, hey, this is your fault. You know, it can't be within our organization. And what we came to figure out later is it was actually the problem was in both of their organizations. And so within the CIA, there was a person named Aldrich Ames, who was a mole who was giving crazy amounts of information to the KGB. And then in the FBI, there was a FBI special agent named Robert Hansen who was doing the same thing. And so the net effect of this is that by the early 90s, so many Russian assets, meaning Russian scientists or KGB officers who had been recruited to spy for the Americans, were being rolled up that Moscow station, which is the CIA station in Moscow, had convinced themselves that the Russians had some new technology that allowed them to spy on them, and they were basically afraid of their own shadows at that time. And so there's a great book written by a journalist and a man named Milt Bearden, and Milt was a CIA officer. He was the Near East Division chief at that time, laying out what actually happened there and how they figured out where the mole was, how they kind of got their mojo back, what it was like to operate in Moscow at that time. And so another novelist friend of mine, David McCluskey, who's a phenomenal writer, his book, The Persian, actually just came out. He's an espionage writer and then was also a CIA officer. Yeah. So full disclosure, I was an FBI special agent, so I'm a little biased as I give my answer to this. But I came into the Bureau post 9/11 after my Army career. It was 2010. And so many of the changes proposed by the 9/11 Commission and the lessons learned from that had already been implemented. And so I would say at a top level, I think the two organizations work better together, or better than they did before. But there's always going to be a tension between those two organizations because at its core, the FBI is a law enforcement organization, and their job is to put bad guys behind bars. And so what that means is everything they gather, even though they're a member of the intelligence community, just like the CIA is gathered with an eye towards someday this might have to go in front of a jury. And so it has to be gathered in ways which are in which we follow our laws and the Constitution, because you can't, there's kind of another way to illustrate this is that if a special agent in the FBI is ever convicted of perjury, that person's career is done, because every FBI special agent needs to be able to stand up, potentially go to court, raise their right hand, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and be believed by a jury and have their word be unimpeachable. CIA officers, on the other hand, we used to call them professional liars, because that's what they do for a living, is to go into foreign nations and gather intelligence, and they're breaking the law as they do that, right? And so there's always going to be the tension where the FBI is eyeing everything that they do with an eye towards building a case, and building a case that they can put in front of a jury and put bad guys behind bars. The CIA, and rightfully so, has absolutely no interest in that. What they're there to do is steal a nation's secrets and bring that back so that the decision makers here have the ability to look in, to read, their enemy's mail or adversary's mail, for lack of a better term, and to give them that insight into what the Soviet Union was doing at the time, or what Russia's doing at the time. So there always is going to be some healthy tension between those two organizations. And I think there should be, because there should be a division between the CIA and what they do and the FBI and what they do. Mitch Rapp, because he works in the CIA, certainly falls into more of that cowboy aspect. And to be frank, that's what readers want, right? Like the heroes that are your heroes in fiction are maybe not necessarily the heroes in real life, should they exist in real life, because while Mitch Rapp and Vince wrote him very remarkably this way, in that Mitch Rapp does bad things to bad people, but those bad things do not alter his character, do not offset his compass, do not impact him morally in any way, right? And that's what, readers want to have, that sense that this is a guy that goes, like I said, and enacts his nation's vengeance or justice in ways that other people can't. But in real life, obviously, it is a little more complicated than that. Yeah, absolutely. So when my first book, Without Sanction, came out, I was doing an interview, a radio interview, and the interviewer said to me, "Are you Matt Drake, who's my protagonist, who is an operative for the Defense Intelligence Agency and a former Ranger?" And she said, "Are you that guy?" And I said, I am absolutely not that guy, but I've stood in the same room with men who could be. And so I think for all of your characters, if you're lucky enough to know men, and in some cases women, who could be those heroes, you want to take a little bit of that and add that veracity to it. Now, sometimes I'll actually put, with their permission, real people in the books as kind of a nod to them. I have, when I got out of the FBI, I worked for a small company that was staffed primarily with veterans from the Army Special Operations community. And so many of them make appearances in my books. But what I like to do that I think is funny is to change their branch affiliation. And so a good friend of mine, Brandon Cates, was an Army Ranger, actually was in the initial invasion during Afghanistan and during the horrible tragedy that in Tarkar with Chapman and all of those guys. And what I do for Brandon to honor him is make him a Navy SEAL instead of an Army Ranger, which he does not particularly enjoy, but I think is pretty hysterical. So, you kind of do those little winks and nods too, but definitely I think all of us who write in this genre are in some manner, big or small, paying homage to the men, and in some cases women who actually do these jobs for a living. So all the books are meant to be or can be read as standalones. So if you are coming new to the Mitch Rapp universe, welcome, and you'll certainly get a look at him and an introduction to it in Denied Access. The next book in the chronological aspect of the Vince Flynn, Mitch Rapp world is Transfer of Power. And so that happens about 8 or 9 years later after Denied Access, and it kind of shows you more when Denied Access takes place. Mitch Rapp is in his early 20s. When Transfer of Power takes place, he's in his early 30s. And so the rest of Vince's books kind of read chronologically from there. And so that's a great jumping off point too after you're done with Denied Access. So anywhere books are sold, you can also go to my website, which is donbentleybooks.com. It's just Bentley, and you can order it through that as well. But anywhere books are sold.